Hey guys, tonight we step into a place where the air is cool enough to raise little bumps on your arms, and the sky is still more indigo than blue. You're standing at the very edge of an ancient Aksumite port on the Red Sea. Yes, that Red Sea. The one that looks calm from a distance, but absolutely will toss you around if you ever try balancing on a reed boat before breakfast. The harbor creaks awake around you, ropes tightening, wooden masts groaning, merchants whispering half-formed jokes as they rub sleep from their eyes. You can smell salt, damp rope fiber, and that faint earthy aroma of raw coffee beans packed inside goatskin sacks. Before you wander too far, here's your gentle reality check. You probably won't survive this as an actual Aksumite trader. Not because the work is dangerous, but because these people wake up earlier than alarm clocks would dare exist. And also, their morning routine begins with mental math before sunrise. Most of us barely manage to count our own fingers before coffee. These people count coffee itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, because if it's past midnight, you're already living the Aksumite lifestyle more than you think. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You ease forward along the worn planks, stepping between crates of dried fish and folded sails. The Red Sea glitters quietly behind you, reflecting the last shy stars. A pair of merchants wave you closer, motioning toward a mound of burlap sacks. They're doing their morning inventory, a real thing Aksumite traders did, because coffee, frankincense, and salt all moved through this region like lifeblood. One man loosens a rope and reveals the beans inside, small, pale, unroasted, and smooth. You run your fingers across them, feeling them shift like tiny polished stones. Aksumite traders often counted beans by handfuls, but not just any handfuls. There were standardized merchant handfuls, believed to be roughly consistent from port to port, even though historians still argue whether their measurement system was truly uniform or just close enough for trade when the sun isn't up yet. That debate has been going on for decades, the academic version of two camels staring at each other, refusing to blink. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some sailors claim that the best bean counters could measure value by sound alone, letting a handful fall into a bowl and judging the quantity by the pitch of the clatter. You listen for a moment as a trader demonstrates. The beans tinkle like soft pebbles, and he nods proudly as if he's just performed a magic trick. You nod back, pretending you totally understood the difference between light rattle and good trade rattle. A group of porters trudges past, carrying sacks of salt so heavy their steps leave crescent dents in the sand. The port is fully awake now. Gulls cry overhead, carts squeak, and a distant vendor is already shouting about freshly baked flatbread, even though the sun hasn't properly shown up. You take another sniff of the raw beans. There's no roasted aroma yet, just the earthy hint of potential. Aksum's dawn feels like a slow exhale. Everything happens quietly, even the small jokes traded between merchants, like two men arguing whether yesterday's tally was off because someone accidentally kicked a sack or because the beans themselves wanted to migrate inland. You can't tell if it's sarcasm or superstition, but honestly, at this hour, you're not judging. Today, you're shadowing the traders from first light onward, watching how they count, recount, and recount again, because in a world where coins existed but trust traveled even farther than goods, bean counts were reputation, and reputation in Aksum could carry you from port to palace. The first tally is done. The traders motion for you to follow as they prepare to move inland, and your real journey begins. You fall in the step beside the traders as they leave the harbor, and almost immediately you realize something strange. They're counting out loud, but in a rhythm. Soft, steady, almost musical. At first, you think they're just trying to stay awake, like people humming to themselves during an early morning commute. But no, this is deliberate.
This is the Aksumite bean counting cadence, a pattern of numbers, pauses, and murmured phrases designed to keep the tally steady even when your hands are cold and the sun isn't fully cooperating. One merchant hands you a small goatskin pouch and tells you to try it. You lift it, lighter than you expected, and pour a measured handful of beans into your palm. The men demonstrate again. Shuffle, count, pause, shuffle, count, longer pause. It's almost like listening to someone solve math problems using ASMR. The mainstream historical fact slips in naturally. Aksumite traders often used vocal patterns to keep pace when measuring goods, especially items like coffee or frankincense that were tiny and numerous. Some of these chants were shared across regions. Others were unique to families or guilds. Imagine competing counting playlists, 4th century edition. But here's your quirky tidbit for this section. Some sources say a few traders had secret fast count cadences, little rhythmic hacks that helped them finish tallies quicker than rivals, kind of like using double speed playback during homework. Listening now, you swear one of the merchants is doing exactly that, his cadence almost suspiciously smooth. He shrugs when you point it out, pretending innocence. Sure. The path ahead slopes upward, the sound of the sea feeding behind you as the rocky landscape brightens under a faint wash of gold. Dust rises with each step. The traders swing their bean sacks across their backs with practiced ease. You try to mimic them and nearly drop yours, earning a polite, sleep-deprived laugh. At least they're friendly. As the sun lifts higher, the rhythm grows steadier. You begin to notice something calming about it. The merchant's footsteps fall in sync with the counting. Even the clinking beads on one man's belt seem timed to the numbers. Before you know it, your own mind starts drifting with the pattern, floating somewhere between the smell of leather, the whisper of sand under your sandals, and that strangely hypnotic bean-counting beat. Historians still argue whether these rhythms had religious or symbolic meaning, or whether they were just practical tools for people who didn't want to lose track after every sneeze. Some archaeologists propose that the cadence might have roots in older ritual counting methods. Other scholars insist that's a romantic exaggeration. Bean counters counting beans, nothing mystic about it. You walk in silence while the debate plays out in your head like a tiny academic argument perched on each shoulder. A trader hands you a second pouch and challenges you to keep count with no mistakes. You try, you fail. He pats your shoulder sympathetically, the universal gesture for "nice try, outsider." The group reaches a short rest stop, a flat boulder overlooking a small ravine. Everyone takes a moment to drink water, adjust straps, and retighten bundles. One man empties a few beans into his palm and immediately begins recounting them for no reason other than habit. You're starting to suspect these people count beans the way others fidget with coins. The rhythm resumes as you move on again, but now you hear nuances you missed before, small accent notes, shifts in pace, tiny spoken markers that replace visual tallies. It's oddly elegant, mathematics disguised as music. Trade disguised as ritual, work disguised as something almost meditative. Maybe that's why these traders rarely make mistakes, or maybe the beans actually do behave better for them. At this point, you wouldn't be surprised. By the time you crest the next ridge, the sun is fully awake, the bean sacks are warm against your hands, and the cadence has nestled itself deep in your brain like a lullaby disguised as arithmetic. You leave the ridge behind and begin following the long, sloping caravan path that cuts into the highlands like a narrow brown ribbon. The air grows cooler as you climb, and the dust under your sandals turns from loose sand to rough basalt gravel. Every step sends tiny echoes up the hillside, small crunches swallowed by the vast morning quiet. The traders around you shift their loads and keep moving, still murmuring the soft bean count cadences that now feel like background music to this slow ascent. A camel snorts beside you, tilting its head in what can only be described as judgment. You're sweating, the traders aren't. You're slightly out of breath,
The traders are discussing grain prices with the calmness of people strolling through a park. You adjust your bean sack again, pretending it's totally fine and not slowly inventing a new kind of shoulder pain. As you climb, one merchant explains, between relaxed breaths, that bean tallies often changed depending on terrain and time of day. That's your mainstream fact for this section. Aksumite traders sometimes recalculated counts when moving from coastal humidity to highland dryness, because beans could shrink slightly as they dried. Not by much, but enough for experienced merchants to notice. So yes, you're walking through a world where even the air negotiates with the economy. He demonstrates by lifting a handful of beans, rolling them between his fingers, then nodding as if they've confessed something to him. You mimic the motion. The beans reveal nothing to you, at least not yet. Your quirky tidbit arrives in the form of another trader who swears, absolutely swears, that seasoned merchants could hear altitude changes in the way the beans clinked inside the sack. You tilt your ear toward your bag and hear beans, just beans. But he insists, claiming he once detected a ridge simply because the pitch of his bean rattle deepened. The group debates whether this is talent or nonsense. You decide it's both, which is often the best explanation for any skill you don't personally have. The path curves upward, passing a cluster of acacia trees whose branches twist like question marks. One trader taps the side of your pouch and asks if your count is still accurate. You confidently say yes, even though you haven't counted anything since the harbor. He grins and tells you to recount. You sigh dramatically, earning a few chuckles. A camel lifts its head again, still judging. As you walk, the conversations shift from bean rhythms to stories about previous journeys through these mountain roads. Merchants tease one man for once losing an entire pouch after tripping on a rock shaped like a grumpy goat. He insists the rock moved. They insist he needs better sandals. You simply note that everyone here has at least one story involving a poorly behaved rock. Historians still argue whether these highland paths were primarily for coffee transport or whether they were multi-purpose trade arteries that just happened to carry beans because everything else did too. Some scholars point to ancient inscriptions indicating structured trade. Others say the roads grew naturally, worn by countless footsteps, carts, and possibly a few very confused goats. You glance at the path, long, smooth, well-worn, and decide both sides are probably half right, as usual. The higher you climb, the more breathtaking the view becomes. Below you, the Red Sea coastline stretches like a shimmering ribbon, while ahead lies a mosaic of hills dotted with small stone huts and terraced fields. The traders pause to retie the ropes on their sacks, not because they're tired, but because this is the usual checkpoint where counts get rechecked. Another rhythmic murmur rises, blending with the rustle of the wind across the plateau. You listen, letting the cadence settle into your chest again. Up here, surrounded by cliffs and echoing footfalls, the counting feels different, more resonant, almost ceremonial. You're starting to understand why these merchants trusted the rhythm. It's memory, measurement, and meditation rolled into one. And as the path levels off and the great highland plain opens before you, it feels like the beans themselves are guiding you onward, clinking softly with every step.
You approach the outskirts of the Aksumite market long before you actually see it. The first sign is the sound, a low, blended murmur of chatter, laughter, haggling, and the occasional bleat of a goat that very clearly does not want to be involved in commerce today. Then comes the smell, roasted grain, faint incense, warm stone, and somewhere nearby, the comforting aroma of something baking. After the long climb through the highlands, the mix feels like an embrace from a city that has been awake far longer than you have. By the time you reach the wide, sunlit plaza, the market is already alive with motion. Tents stitched from dyed cotton flap lazily in the breeze. Vendors arrange bronze trinkets, clay pots, carved combs, fresh herbs, and baskets of spices whose colors outshine the fabrics around them. And tucked between all of this, of course, are the bean counters. Aksum's traders don't just sell coffee beans here. They talk about them, compare them, brag about them in the way modern people might brag about their sleep schedule or step count, proud but slightly defensive. As you weave through the crowd, you hear one merchant complaining that his beans dried faster than expected during last week's journey, while another insists that his latest batch survived a sandstorm with heroic discipline. You mentally rank these as Bean Dad stories, ancient edition. A friendly trader leads you to his usual spot, a shaded area beside a low stone wall, where he spreads a woven mat and gently pours out a portion of his beans. They spill like a small brown waterfall, catching the sunlight. This is where the counting becomes performance. And here's your mainstream fact. Certain Aksumite markets treated bean counts as demonstrations of reliability. A precise, confident tally wasn't just inventory, it was reputation management. Buyers watched closely. Too slow, and you seemed inexperienced. Too fast, and people suspected you were estimating instead of measuring. Finding that sweet middle pace took practice, and these traders had it down to an art. Your quirky tidbit strolls over in the form of a customer who insists on what he calls the sniff test. He picks up a handful of beans, smells them deeply, and nods as though he has gleaned their entire life story. The trader indulges him. You try it too. The beans smell like beans. You decide not to pretend you detect notes of mountain breeze, though the customer claims exactly that. People have always had strong opinions about things they don't grow themselves. The haggling begins. Not aggressive, not loud, just a gentle back and forth of math, memory, and muttered bean rhythms. The numbers flow like a slow game of chess between two extremely polite players. You observe carefully, because this is where quiet ledgers come in. While the open-air haggling unfolds, one trader behind the scenes makes marks on a thin wooden tablet, lines, dots, curves. These are tally marks, subtle and quick, meant to track value without drawing attention. They don't tally the full inventory yet, that comes later tonight, but they record the transactions, customer preferences, and any notable losses or gains from the journey. It's the ancient version of a spreadsheet, but with better handwriting. Historians still argue whether these wooden tablets were standardized accounting tools or whether each merchant had their own personal system. Some evidence suggests that guilds trained apprentices to follow specific recording patterns. Other researchers say these markings varied so widely that interpreting them today is like trying to read 5 different dialects of bean math. Looking at the tablet now, you sympathize with the scholars. A group of teenage apprentices runs past, carrying sacks twice their size. One nearly bumps into you, muttering apologies, while the others tease him for trying to scatter the inventory. You watch as their master scolds them affectionately and immediately recounts the beans they were carrying. It takes him about 30 seconds, and you're jealous of how casual he is about it. You stay in the market longer than you meant to, drifting between stalls, tasting a sweet honey cake someone insists you try, listening to the melodic negotiations happening all around. Here, counting beans isn't just math, it's conversation, culture, and gentle competition. You get the feeling that if someone invented a board game based on this system, the Aksumites would absolutely dominate it. By the time the sun begins tilting westward, the market's energy softens. Merchants start planning their evening tallies, joking quietly about whose records will be flawless and whose memory will mysteriously skip 3 handfuls again. When the trader you've been shadowing gathers his remaining beans and gestures for you to follow, you realize the day is far from over, because nightfall is when the real counting begins.
You follow the traders away from the fading noise of the market, heading toward a cluster of stone huts perched at the edge of the highland plain. The sun is dropping behind the ridges now, stretching long amber shadows across the fields. The air cools quickly at this elevation, slipping under your clothes like a quiet reminder that Aksumite nights were meant to be felt, not ignored. The men speak in softer tones as they walk, the day's energy settling into a slow, comfortable rhythm, perfect for the one task they take more seriously than any other, the nightfall tally. A small fire crackles to life as the traders settle onto woven mats. The sky darkens into deep violet, the first stars blinking awake like curious spectators. The sacks of beans are lowered carefully, almost ceremonially, and one man hands you a shallow wooden bowl polished by countless nights like this. Bean counting at dawn was about routine. Bean counting at dusk is about precision. Here's your mainstream fact. Aksumite merchants typically performed their most careful inventory at night, when winds were calmer, distractions fewer, and the day's trades fresh in memory. Night fire counting wasn't always required, but among long-distance merchants it was practically sacred. A reliable ledger was the difference between trust and suspicion in an empire that spanned sea routes, caravan roads, and political alliances. The firelight flickers across the traders' faces as they begin. Their movements are slower than in the morning, deliberate, almost meditative. They pour beans from sack to bowl in measured cascades, each handful creating a soft patter against the carved wood. You watch the shadows dance along the curves of the bowl, the beans glowing like tiny embers as they roll into place. Your quirky tidbit drifts in from a gray-bearded trader who proudly demonstrates his memory trick. He claims he remembers counts not by numbers, but by shapes. He visualizes each tally as a pattern of stars. If he ever forgets where he paused, he simply recalls the constellation of the last handful. The others tease him mercilessly, claiming this method is why he once sold the wrong sack to the wrong buyer. He fires back that at least he doesn't miscount when distracted by pretty customers. Everyone laughs, including you. The counting continues, soft and steady. Occasionally, a man interrupts his rhythm to jot a mark on his wooden ledger tablet. Tiny scratches that look meaningless but represent entire conversations, sales, debts, and promises. Historians still argue whether these tablets were temporary notes or long-term accounting records, but looking at the careful way the traders update them, you'd bet on the latter. A brief gust of wind makes the fire dance higher, and for a moment you feel the calm weight of the setting. The highlands stretching into darkness, the crackling fire, the murmur of numbers, the beans rolling like small echoes of the day's journey. You realize you've been breathing slower, matching the cadence without meaning to. The traders notice and exchange amused looks. One man nudges you with his elbow and says, "Now you're learning." When the final handful drops into the final bowl, the head merchant does one last recount just to be certain. The total matches the morning's ledger exactly. He nods with quiet satisfaction. This is the part where the day closes properly, not with celebration, not with exhaustion, but with the reassuring knowledge that every bean is where it should be. The fire shrinks into soft embers, the stars above multiply, and as the traders pack away their tools and prepare to sleep, you understand why this nightly ritual matters. It isn't only about trade, it's about memory, trust, and the slow, steady rhythm of a world that measured value one bean at a time. The fire settles into a gentle glow, faint orange light pulsing softly against the cool stone walls of the huts. The traders stretch out on their woven mats, their breathing quiet and even, drifting into the kind of rest that comes after long roads and longer routines. You stay seated a little longer, watching the last curls of smoke rise and unravel into the night air. Each wisp fades slowly, as though the sky is quietly pulling it upward, smoothing the edges of the day until everything is soft again. The highland breeze moves across your shoulders, cool and unhurried. It brushes past the empty bowls, rustles the ends of the woven mats, and carries with it a faint scent of roasted grain from some distant hearth. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a camel grumbles drowsily, then falls silent. Even the insects seem to whisper now, their sounds blending into a single steady hum that drapes itself across the landscape. You lie back on the mat, feeling the gentle give of the fibers beneath you. The stars above scatter themselves into wide, drifting patterns, their glow muted just enough to keep your eyes relaxed. Each breath you take grows deeper, slower, a little warmer in your chest. The world around you quiets further, settling into a soft rhythm just like the bean counts you followed from dawn until nightfall. Let that rhythm settle into you now. Let the steps along the mountain path fade away, the market voices drift away, the fire's warmth linger only as a memory in the air. Everything slows, everything softens. The day releases its final threads of noise and movement, leaving only calm. You're safe here, resting beneath a patient sky, wrapped in the gentle quiet of an ancient world, easing itself into sleep.